If you've been scrolling through endless NAS options, watching video after video comparing 4 bay versus 5 bay, 1 GBE versus 2.5 GBE, and still feel like you might end up with a box that looks great on paper but doesn't actually fit into your daily workflow, this review is meant to clear that up. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. I've spent the last couple of weeks setting up the DiskStation DS1525 plus the way a typical home office power user would, mixing a small media library, a handful of work documents, and a couple of Docker containers for personal projects so I can tell you whether the hype matches the hands-on experience. First off, the biggest question people have is whether a 5 bay unit is worth the extra price compared to a more common 4 bay model. In real life, the extra bay translates to a tangible upgrade only if you actually need that extra capacity now or you plan to expand soon. The bundle I tested comes with 5 4TB SATA drives, giving you 20 terabytes of raw storage right out of the box. That's already enough to house a 4K movie collection, a complete backup of a 1 terabyte laptop, and still have room for a few virtual machine images. If you're a hobby photographer or a small business that backs up client files nightly, that extra 4 terabytes can be the difference between having to buy a second NAS in a year versus just filling the existing bays. The DS1525 Plus is built around a Ryzen V1500B processor, which is a modest but capable quad-core chip. In practice, you'll notice the difference when you start running more than one service at a time. I had Plex streaming a 1080p movie, Synology Drive syncing a couple of gigabytes of work files, and a lightweight Nextcloud container all running simultaneously. The CPU never hit a red line, it hovered around 30% usage, and the system stayed responsive. That's a practical strength you don't see on paper, the ability to juggle multiple services without the UI lag you sometimes get on older, weaker NAS boxes. Network performance is where the DS1525 Plus really tries to stand out. It ships with two 2.5 GBE ports, and you can aggregate them for up to 5 gigabits per second throughput if your router or switch supports link aggregation. In my home lab, I connected the NAS to a 2.5 GBE switch and ran a series of file copy tests from a Windows PC. Large 10 GB files transferred at around 250 megabytes per second, which is roughly double the speed of a typical 1 GBE setup. If your everyday workflow involves moving multi-gigabyte video files between your editing workstation and the NAS, that speed boost translates into minutes saved each day. However, the practical weakness is that most consumer routers still ship with only 1 GBE ports, so unless you upgrade your networking gear, you won't see the full benefit. In that case, the extra Ethernet ports are nice but not essential. RAM is another area that can be a hidden trade-off. The unit arrives with 8 GB of DDR4, which Synology says is expandable. For most home users, 8 GB is plenty, especially if you're only running file shares, media streaming, and a couple of Docker containers. If you plan to host more demanding virtual machines, or you want to run multiple heavy Docker workloads, like a self-hosted GitLab and a Home Assistant instance together, you'll quickly feel the limit. Upgrading the RAM is possible, but you have to open the chassis and purchase compatible modules separately. That's not a deal-breaker, but it's a cost you need to factor in if you anticipate heavy virtualization. One of the strengths that often goes unnoticed until you actually use the DSM, DiskStation Manager, interface is the way Synology bundles software updates. The DS1525 Plus received a firmware update the day after I set it up, and the update process was completely painless. No reboots, no manual driver installs. All the services kept running, and the new version added a few quality-of-life tweaks to the storage manager that made expanding a volume a few clicks instead of a complicated CLI task. For users who aren't comfortable with Linux command lines, that seamless update path is a real confidence booster. Now, who should definitely consider buying this? If you're a remote worker who needs a reliable home server for both personal and professional files, a small content creator who wants to host a media library that can stream to multiple devices at once, or a tech enthusiast who enjoys dabbling with Docker containers and maybe a couple of light VMs, the DS1525 Plus hits a sweet spot. The 5-bay design also makes it future-proof for families that anticipate adding more drives for surveillance footage or expanding a growing digital archive. The bundled 20 terabytes is a solid starting point, and the ability to attach a DX525 expansion unit later means you can go beyond 20 terabytes without buying a whole new box. On the flip side, if you're just looking for a simple backup destination for a couple of laptops, a 3-bay or even a 2-bay NAS from Synology's lower line would save you a good chunk of money. The extra CPU horsepower and dual 2.5 GBE ports won't be fully utilized, and the